Miami Dolphins enjoyed a much better day of practice against Detroit on Thursday. We're talking about some headlines out of there and a whole lot more here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. I want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Good news for everybody. If you got the Dolphins at plus 27.5 today for practice against Detroit, you're buying drinks at happy hour for everybody because the Dolphins had a much better day of practice today than they did yesterday. So I want you to pick up the phone. I want you to call your mom, your dad, your bro, your sis, your auntie, your uncle, your peepaw, your mammy, whoever you want, and tell them that we're uncanceling the season and 2025 is going to happen. Okay? This is just ridiculous amounts of pendulum swings to get your priors affirmed here in the middle of August. The Dolphins came out firing and executing. The offense had a lot more life. The defense found some more contested opportunities, but I think there's some context clues, and we got into this a little bit yesterday, right? I'm talking about, I don't know what they were trying to achieve yesterday at practice. Well, Mike McDaniel spoke this morning, and one of the things that he talked about was what they did with the corners. And he said, first of all, I got to learn so much about the cornerback unit because it challenged a lot of guys to do semi-uncomfortable things against super good players in one-on-ones. First and foremost, people are actually trying what we're doing in one-on-ones against Amon-Ra St. Brown is about as good as they get, him in particular. So you learn, okay, what type of boldness that person has. Are they just going to rely on stuff that's worked before? Having said that, what a great rep of seeing how people respond after they get punched, and that's all that matters. A lot of guys being competitively challenged, and that's the number one thing in this league. You better be ready for how you've got to respond to a play being made. You have to. There was some really, really good decisive discipline run fits and some good matched coverage from guys that I already knew had a play that they just didn't like in one-on-ones. So you could see on the Amon-Ra St. Brown and one mixtape that dropped last night from the Detroit Lions, it was a lot of Jack Jones in coverage, but it was also a lot of single coverage. And Mike McDaniel alluding to that, we challenged a lot of guys to do semi-uncomfortable things against super good receivers. Well, Amon-Ra still gets his, right? But it sounds like they made some adjustments defensively. I don't know what they did and did not do from a coverage shell perspective and team that was different. But the Dolphins showed up today. And that in and of itself, you wonder how much of that is the byproduct of a long trip where they've been away from home for over a week. How much of that is getting distracted by what Grant Stewart had to say about how the Dolphins weren't prepared to practice. Whatever. At the end of the day, the Dolphins' execution without Tyreek Hill and without Devon Achane, who did not practice today, was exponentially better. And there was plays made in the red zone. D. Eskridge continues to make plays. I had kind of resided in my mind that like I was going to buy in on Taj Washington and he was going to be the wide receiver 5, but D. Eskridge is kind of making it undeniable right now for his role and impact. Waddle was back today, had a lot of big plays for Jalen Waddle, which is what you would expect, right? There's going to continue to be ups and downs. Now, the public eye of that, we won't see with the exception of the preseason contest. Mike McDaniel alluded to probably not going to see the starters and the ones on Saturday against Detroit. And that's okay. Like, I don't mind seeing a half of Zach Wilson and a half of Quinn Ewers and figuring out how those guys are assimilating. I don't need to see any more of Devon Achane or Jalen Waddle to know what they're capable of. The defense, they had three. Some of the starters had 3 snaps against Chicago. Zach Sealer had the day off today, was out there in his jersey and a ball cap. So I don't know how much of this is load management for these guys or not, but nice to see this football team respond after everybody had a bad practice report and the team was done and dead in the water. And see, I told you they were soft and they don't have that much talent. It's like, let them play the games first, right? If it looks like this after 6 games, you're probably pretty safe to say what you feel and having your priors affirmed. But it's August 14th. None of us were even at practice. And if you were at practice, I'd love to hear from you because there was like 4 guys on the Dolphins beat who were at practice yesterday and today. It was David Furones. It was Alan Pupar. It was Travis Wingfield. And it was Isaiah Smalls from the Herald. That's it. This is the Miami contingent. So unless you're one of those guys, and the Detroit beat mysteriously quiet today. A couple of guys that could not stop talking enough about how dominant Detroit was yesterday. I think they sent a combined 4 tweets today. So, Dolphins punch back. This team's got some fight left in them. After all, on August 14th. The other thing that I enjoyed from Mike McDaniel, before we flip and turn the page, and The Athletic put out a piece about Mike McDaniel that I really want to get into because there's some interesting stuff here about the transition for this year's football team from what last year was like. Goes back to process versus results. And Mike was asked about the frustration that Tua expressed yesterday after yesterday's practice. Mike's response, Tua said that right after practice, right? We're very process driven, but as competitors, it's impossible to not get really, really annoyed and pissed off when the results aren't what you expect they would be. Quite honestly, I didn't like a majority of the results of plays either. But for me, I think what players on the team that have been with me have learned, what people learn every single NFL season, is you are addressing a challenge of independently addressing your craft with positive or negative feedback, negative results or positive results. Are you going to take your foot off the gas and start doing less because you've had positive results? Or are you going to assess what your positive results are and assess what the negative ones are? For me, I didn't like practice because there were a lot of negative results tied to things that we've been working on in our process. I'm cool with contested losses. I'm not cool with bust. I'm cool with the DB making a great play. I'm not cool with the receiver running the wrong route, those types of things. Overall, the day was the environment of what it was I expected. The tonality and energy of who we are practicing against was what I was expected. We signed up for this because it's invaluable August work for things that we'll continue to have to work on regardless of results in September, but they'll actually count. Based upon our responses, we'll see how valuable yesterday was or how much those lessons weren't learned from certain things. This was said before practice, and the Dolphins go out and they have a banger of a practice. Right? It is process over results. There are things, and Mike McDaniel kind of alluded to with the corners, right? Like we put them in uncomfortable situations. I'm not going into practice saying, man, how do I limit how many times Amon-Ra St. Brown catches the ball? I want to say who drops their nuts today at practice, to borrow the phrase from Cam Smith. Well, the Dolphins as a team did today at practice. And we should be applauding that. Now, The Athletic, Jeff Howe, put out a piece inside Mike McDaniel's vision for turning around the Dolphins. Some interesting, 2 in particular, passages in here about why, and it goes back to the same phrase that we've used many times this offseason, the Dolphins may not be as talented in some spots, but they're probably a better team. We're going to get into that next here on Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Yahoo Fantasy. It is the best time of year. NFL kickoff is almost here, and that means fantasy football season is back in full swing. This year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with fantasy football experience unlike any before. Locked On Dolphins this year is playing on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league, to celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness. Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features throughout 28 days in the month of August to To kick it off, they just dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play Yahoo Fantasy Football, where the lowest scoring team each week is eliminated until there's just one team left standing. With the season around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this mode a new try. Or if you're more into the classics, you could still play head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. I'm not going to get into everything in this story because I, as somebody who does a lot of film work over at Touchdown Miami on Substack, and that is a lot of that ends up sitting behind a paywall where I want you guys to invest in that product as kind of the deluxe top shelf experience. This is some deluxe top shelf reporting from Jeff Howe for The Athletic, and I want to be respectful of that. So I'm not going to tell you everything that's in this story. I recommend that you go and find that out for yourself. But there's two stretches in particular that I think speak magnitudes about what the Dolphins were dealing with and what their big picture plan was to kind of get everybody on the same page. And the first one is Mike McDaniel telling Jeff Howe 5 players on the 2024 roster incurred half of the team's internal fines for distractions such as being late. So let's just say the Dolphins were intentional about the players they wanted to retain this season, along with the kinds of players they wanted to add to their roster. Half of your team's fines across a 53-man roster and the practice squad. So I'm not a math guy, but it's about almost 1/11th, really, right? I mean, 5 divided by 53, you're getting close to 1/11th. But then you also have 16, on the practice squad. You're talking about 69 players. That's 7% of the roster was accountable for 50% of the fines in 2024. And what we're not going to do, I'm not going to get here and have everybody give their best guesses on who the Fab 5 of fines were for the Dolphins in 2024. The fact that Jeff Howe in the story specifies the Dolphins were intentional about the players they wanted to retain this season, I think you could probably find a hearty portion of those 5 players, if not all, probably all but one, are probably no longer with the Dolphins. That's the inferred statement by Jeff Howe in the story. But the other part that was really interesting to me about this story was talking about players being more like-minded. And here's the sentence in particular. With a more like-minded roster, McDaniel doesn't have to manage his messages when talking to the room. Anybody want to venture a guess on who that could possibly be talking about? Because I got 5 on it with my guess. Knowing full well that these were the kinds of problems that this team had to battle last year. You're trying to directly communicate with your team, but then you have to change the tonality of your messaging or change the phrasing of your messaging, or else be at risk of upsetting a player or a few players based on the phrasing. Not having to deal with this, whether that's well-seasoned veteran players who don't agree with your way of doing things because they did it somewhere else and they feel that's the right way to do it, or dealing with players that believe they are above the law, or dealing with players who believe they are immune from the criticism and the shortcomings of the unit because of their own standards and how they hold themselves. And you can go back through many a disappointing game outcomes and review the transcripts and just count the number of I's in the statements from some of the players that you may have that hunch about. And you may be surprised how many times the word I was used instead of we or us. So again, I'm not telling you the Dolphins are more talented in some phases. I think there's plenty of places they are on this roster where they are more talented. I'm not telling you they're better off necessarily in all phases. I'm not telling you the result is going to be better, but it sure feels like the process of it, going back to that theme that Mike McDaniel just got done talking about before today's practice, talking about the process of your approach and how you execute and how you go about your business, et cetera, et cetera. The process of the team that they have tried to put together certainly feels like a more sustainable model than a 2024 team that had 7% of the roster accounting for 50% of the fines, and probably a list that was similarly short, forcing Mike McDaniel to manage his messages when talking to the room, per the story by Jeff Howe. And this is not necessarily like Mike McDaniel has a problem. I think Mike McDaniel has his own individual shortcomings, and a lot of them can probably be tied to him being a first-time head coach when he gets to Miami and being put in this position to deal with big personalities and loud opinions and big salaries and salaries that are bigger than his, right? I think there's still some game management stuff and maybe some blind spots, and no coach is perfect in that regard. And I do not buy the idea that Mike McDaniel is an incapable leader of a locker room. I don't personally prescribe to that because I've seen some of the non-public media or non-public practice iterations of Mike, and how when you need to have those hard conversations, he's had some. Now, I think his model and ideal and utopia for a leadership within a locker room has probably been a little too passive and put a little bit too much into the hands of the players. And then the players and the pecking order of who's determined to be amongst the leaders and the loudest voices, if that's dictated by the wrong things, like your salary or your name brand value, it probably is putting that power into the wrong hands to fully facilitate your message. And whether or not they get that right is going to be a defining variable of the 2025 season. But they certainly seem to think, based off of what was discussed in this Jeff Howe story, that they've made some necessary changes and some calculated decisions of talent versus everything else, and picked, in some of these spots, everything else. But enough about Mike McDaniel and the Dolphins practice on Thursday and how we canceled the season on Wednesday, and then the season got uncanceled this morning because the Dolphins showed up for joint practice against Detroit like they meant business and took care of business and had a highly competitive practice with Detroit. Enough about that. I'm going to go to the depth chart. I want to talk about 10 players in total, 5 on each side of the fence. 10 players in total that I want to see more of and less of in the preseason 2 matchup against the Detroit Lions. That's next year on Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. Most people can't name all of their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. When you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that helps bring your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off of your first year. That's 50% off of your first year at monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL. Let's start in the secondary here. I just went through all the young cats on the defense and kind of explored how these guys showed. Um, a name I want to see more of, and it's a player that seems to have gotten an elevation in opportunity this past week, and I think played well across 16 snaps, well, playing late in the first preseason matchup against Chicago. Jason Marshall, 5th-round draft pick. I thought he was very well represented in the game against Chicago for the press man opportunities, the movement skill opportunities. He looked comfortable. And man, what a turn of events it would be if he ends up being lightning in a bottle for Miami in their secondary. Now, the process of getting to that point in time might be a little reckless, but nevertheless, Jason Marshall is somebody I want to see more of playing against Detroit. I also want to see more of Dante Trader, who did not play in the first preseason game, but saw his name a couple of times this week after returning to practice for the joints against Detroit. I want to know what Dante Trader has got for us in his bid to claim a prominent role in the safety room. And I would not dismiss based on I was not overly inspired by Patrick McMorris. Elijah Campbell got dinged up a little bit. Ifeatu Melifonwu's got an extensive injury background list that has you concerned about whether or not you can rely on him for 17 games or not. I'll see Dante Trader. So two of the ones I want to see more of this week against Detroit. I want more film on Jason Marshall and Dante Trader. This next cat, you can tell me he played the whole game against Detroit. I'd be fired up. Derek McClendon, number 59, was a monster in stretches. Now, was it perfect against Chicago? No. The run fits, the setting of the edge, the separation of his chest was all a work in progress. But when he got wide angles and he got soft edges and he got the opportunity to rush up the field and he got the opportunity to bend the arc, holy smokes, he looked really good. So I want to see, I would love to see Derek McClendon because he's competing with Cam Good, Muhammad Kamara, Grayson Murphy for a 5th edge spot and could potentially, he's bendier and I think he's more explosive than Quentin Bell. Now, Quentin Bell, heavier hands, has developed in that regard, had multiple years of time in the NFL to develop his craft in that regard. I would still say Quentin Bell's ahead of him. But I think McClendon might have a higher pass rush 3rd down ceiling. So I want to see. I'm really intrigued by Derek McClendon. I think he has the opportunity to really have some juice for you. If I go to the offensive side of the ball for players I want to see more of, I would love to see Tanner Conner get some targets. Get some middle of the field targets. We know what they want Tanner Conner to be. This isn't necessarily I want to see more of him because he did something that really inspired me. That's relevant for the other 3 names that we just talked about on defense. I don't necessarily feel that way with Tanner Conner. He has positional flexibility, but the execution of the fullback stuff was not great. We did get a lot of displacement outside of the first play of the game, really, for Tanner Conner in that regard. But his stuff where he's in the backfield and he's contacting guys on the edges while lining up the backfield, not the kind of movement that you want. So if we're going to continue this song and dance, we're going to stay committed here. I need to see an actual hang your hat area of your game. Can't just be, he's versatile, he can line up, right? That's the Liam Eichenberg appeal as well. He knows all 5 spots on the offensive line. And there is inherent value of not rostering a backup fullback or not rostering a certain offensive lineman who only plays one position because Eichenberg could technically play off. That element does exist. And I want to be fair in dismissing that right now. But if you're talking about a tight end room that has Darren Waller, Julian Hill, Pharaoh Brown, what do we know about any of these options as far as passing threats? What do we know about how big of a leap is Julian Hill going to have? I would not shy away if I was the Dolphins from playing both Hill and Pharaoh Brown meaningful snaps against Detroit. Pharaoh needs the reps and Julian needs the development. But if you've got all these pass catchers and you've got a fullback and you've got these two inline guys, like I want there to be a place for Tanner Conner to authentically win. Taj Washington's the last name. Handful of targets, explosive play, twitched up, forced a couple missed tackles. Great story. You made a dogfight for a wide receiver spot on the 53. Because D. Eskridge is not going away. D. Eskridge reportedly had the play of the practice by mossing DJ Reed in the end zone and getting his feet inbounds. Eskridge is not going away, and he has special teams value. So I want to see more Taj Washington, and now's your time to sell. Get everybody on board. Now, 5 players I want to see a little bit less of. Feel pretty good about where these guys are at. The first one is B.J. Adams, the undrafted corner out of UCF. Missed the opportunity to rake the hands on the touchdown catch against Chicago. Passive with his run support. It was a disappointing showing for me, if I'm being honest. For a guy that got kind of gassed up for his short memory and his length and his competitiveness. He couldn't accelerate and stay in the hip pocket and play in phase. Kind of ready to pass there, personally. I would say the same for Ethan Robinson in the backfield, number 46, in defensive backfield, I should say. He had a silly penalty against Chicago. You could, if the opportunity cost is more reps for Cornell Armstrong, Jason Marshall, potentially Ethan Bonner, Cam Smith back this week, Isaiah Johnson, like I would be highly interested in seeing all of those guys get reps than Ethan Robinson and BJ Adams, and especially Cam Smith. Like, can we come out and put some good tape out on display? What would that mean for Cam Smith? I don't know that it means anything for his outlook for the Dolphins. Is there a sell opportunity? Remember when the Dolphins traded Noah Benogany for, was it Kelvin Joseph? And it was just like, your disappointing player for my disappointing player. Like, could the Dolphins have that world come into reality for Cam Smith? Because I would not pick him to make this roster right now. I would. I would not mind seeing less. My third name, hate to say it, just got done talking about a early draft choice for a Dolphins draft class, Channing Tindall. Yes, when he green dogs and adds on to rushes and has run blitzes and fires through gaps with confidence to get downhill, he's got explosiveness, he's got physicality, he's got some good length, he's a physical striker for sure. But the play processing and the reacting to play action pass and getting into your zone drops and being in the right space from a spacing perspective, I'd rather watch Eugene Asante get some opportunities. Now, I think for the challenge for the Dolphins is Dotson, Brooks, Gabe Britt. Like, I don't know how long I'd let any of those guys play. Like, if you're not going to play the starters, then Brooks and Dotson, put them on the shelf. It's Willie Gay and KJ Britt to start the game. I thought those guys played really well in Detroit with their opportunities, but like, I don't know how long I want those guys out there either. I might be out here running with Tyndall, Asante, and Daquan Jackson for 50 minutes of this football game just out of necessity because you only have so many names. But Eugene Asante is the one that I'd like to see out of that group. See, like, what do we become? And I got sniped on this last one now because that was, I guess technically I've got 2 more. I had Jermaine Ifedi on my list, and the Dolphins put him on IR today. So they IR Jermaine Ifedi. There will probably be an injury settlement there in some way, shape, or form, and then they release him. And the Dolphins signed Yanni Kajust, a former New England Patriot, New York Giant, to compete potentially for OT4. I like it better than Ifedi. Ifedi did not have a good game, but that would be the 4th name on my list for names that I don't want to see. I'm good. Like I could go without watching more. The last name on this list, names I don't want to see more of against Detroit than what we saw against Chicago, is Jalen Wright. Devon Achane, if you're not starting the starters, feel pretty good in that regard of what you have with Devon Achane. Jalen Wright, it's not that he performed poorly. That's a player I want to protect because we need to figure out what the running back room is going to look like. And it's safe to assume Achane, Wright, and Ollie Gordon are going to make this roster. But is Mike Boone or Aaron Shamplin going to make the roster? And if the answer is no, then you really can't afford an injury to one of the other guys. So I'd probably let Ollie get some run in the first half. And then I'd give the second half to Mike Boone and Shamplin. And I would ride off into the sunset feeling like, okay, we're another week closer to having Achane and Wright and Gordon ready to roll. And then we're going to look to waivers and maybe add a fourth running back that way. That's my 2 cents. That's going to do it for us here today on the show. Kyle Krabs, keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. Remember to pick up the phone and call somebody and tell them that we've uncanceled the Dolphins 2025 season. It is going to go on as originally planned after today's practice that saved the season against Detroit. That's going to do it. I'm out of here, Kyle Krabs. Keep it locked in. I'll talk to you all again tomorrow.